Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Fandom. I am glad to have you joining us today. We've got a really great episode lined up with Ross from the Dice for Brains Star Wars Actual Play podcast. So I hope you get to enjoy this episode and learn so much about the Star Wars role-playing game system, how it's evolved from where it was to what it is now, and everything else that we talk about in the episode. Just as a reminder, on the 15th of November, Jaquel and I will be talking about the third book in the Iron Druid Chronicles, Hammered, by Kevin Hearn. So if you haven't read it, just see if you can catch up, or if you're currently reading some of the other Iron Druid Chronicle books, definitely go back and check out our previous episodes. We have 3 of them out now. One on the novella Grimoire of the Lamb, and then the first 2 novels, Hounded and Hexed. So Hammered will be out on the 15th, and then we have 2 more episodes rounding out the end of November. So take a listen for those. Make sure to subscribe, leave some love on iTunes reviews, send an email, just check in and join our new Facebook group, which is called The Fandom of Tales from the Fandom, and join in on some great discussions. Enjoy the episode.
Are you a fan of movies?
Or comics?
Or video games?
Or just anything else nerdy?
Well, you should check out the Zing This podcast. And that's spelled
Z-E-N-G.
This. And you can find us every Monday. And we have nerdy topics from comic book reviews to in-depth analysis of iconic nerdy movies, as well as video game discussions. Where's some of the best places to find us, Allie?
Well, Podbean, of course.
You can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play.
Anywhere else you listen to your podcast. Yeah.
So check us out. Once again, that is
Zing This.
And welcome to another episode of Tales from the Fandom. Today I am joined by someone that I got to meet at Star Wars Celebration here in Orlando this year. And his name is Ross, and he does a podcast called Dice for Brains, which we will definitely dive into later on in this episode. Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, Ross.
Thank you so much, David. This is very exciting. I am so glad we get a chance to talk again. It was awesome meeting you at Celebration. And thanks for having me on.
You know, that was like one of the big things at Star Wars Celebration, which I'd never seen before at any other convention, was that they had a podcast room set up for people. Obviously, you know, they were approved beforehand to get in there, but it's awesome to like meet other podcasters in the, not only like Star Wars, but just in general. There's a couple of people that were in there that were like not really Star Wars themed, but is cool to meet people. Just, you know, hey, look, there's a podcasting room and there's people doing podcasts and getting to meet people.
Yeah, we spent a little time there. We are part of the so we're part of the D20 radio network, and there is a show on it called The Knights of Ren, and they do the Destiny tabletop card dice game. So we actually met up with them there, and I got to play a game with them. It was really cool. So we met a ton of people there. It was an awesome experience.
It was, and this was my first Star Wars Celebration ever, and
mine too.
I just really started going to conventions the year before, just with like MegaCon here in Orlando, and then did Star Wars Celebration this year and MegaCon this year.
Nice.
Slowly getting out there, because conventions are a bit overwhelming, and Star Wars was, I got there early and I was like, okay, you know, there's going to be a line to get in, and I know what time it opens. I'll get there early enough, and then to be put into basically like this cattle holding area to be let in, that was an experience.
One of our friends, Tiffany, who writes for the Florida Times Union here, she went early too, and I think she said it took them like 4 hours to get in. I heard they had that fixed by the second day, though.
Yep. I saw a lot of the complaining, because it's like Thursday where people were waiting in line for hours just to get in.
That's crazy. We got there kind of late, luckily.
I told my wife on like after hearing all the reports Thursday, because I had the press pass to get in, and I'd only planned to go on Saturday. I was like, I don't even know if I want to go, if I'm going to spend hours just in line. But
yeah, luckily we missed most of that. So
Yeah, it's a lot easier, especially by Saturday. A lot of the things had calmed down, and I wasn't in the need for like going to some of like those big panels that people had camped out for. I was like, no, I'm good with like listening to the people talking about the books that are coming
Right.
out.
Yeah, and you could watch them on YouTube. So even if you couldn't get into them, we sat in the
Exactly.
hallway and watched it on YouTube.
Exactly. That was one of those big things that I'm really happy that they're starting to do at these conventions. Is start streaming live or putting them out there, like the next day for people to listen to or watch, because that's one of those big things in conventions that sometimes you're missing out on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the name of the game. You're always going to be missing something. There's no way to check them all off. But yeah, that was an interesting convention for me. I've never been to one that was, most of the time we go to, Dragon Con or, Mega. It's a bigger, wider fandom, not so completely laser focused. So that was a crazy experience. It was different. Like, I don't know. It was a different con experience. It was perfectly enjoyable, but certainly it felt different from like Dragon Con for me anyways.
Right. Yeah, because and that's the same thing with me. Like, I'm used to like MegaCon, where you're getting a cross section of everything, and this one was just Star Wars, and I've loved Star Wars probably since like the mid '80s, give or take. But at the same time, like, there are people in the Star Wars community who are not like the nice. Like, I sat down next to somebody, and like just the way that they were talking about other people is like, you're not really being like the kind of Star Wars fan that I expect from people.
Yeah, there were certainly some extremes that were slightly off-putting for me. I get that. That was and that was what was unique about the laser focus. Like, there wasn't, it wasn't like you could go just check out something that NASA's doing, in the other room down the hall. So it was certainly a fun experience. The cosplay was ridiculously good. Some of the best stuff I've ever seen was there, for sure.
Yeah, it was cool. I don't know if I would do it again, just because I think I like the blend.
Me too.
I'm not sure if I could just do like only Star Wars, and as a teenager, I did only like Star Trek conventions back in the day. Cool. So I like the cross section. I'll take like a sample of everything.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar boat. If it ends up in the backyard to where I live again, that's a different story. But yeah, I think if I'm traveling, it's going to be to Dragon Con probably.
There you go. Now, you're into a lot of different fandoms. Obviously, Star Wars is one of them. But you and I are both into a really big one that's been around probably longer than I know that I've been alive.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
It wasn't around. And that's tabletop gaming.
Yes, in all its forms, but especially role-playing games.
Now, how did you get into role-playing games? Like, was it, like, for me, I remember that my parents had one of those like mall, like, those little mall shop, like carts in the middle.
Okay.
And they sold like little knick-knacky things.
Cool.
And a lot of my time would be spent in B. Dalton in their fantasy section. And I remember picking up like all the second edition, like complete book of dwarves or the complete book of elves. Nice. And the complete guide to fighters. And that was like my introduction to role-playing. Even if I wasn't actually playing the game, I was slowly getting into it. Right. Where did you start off?
I had hand-me-downs. So I have an older cousin who played a lot in college, and as I was a teenager, or well, a little younger than that, a preteen, he handed down all of the books. He had pretty much everything from the second edition. I mean, it was all beaten. None of the spines were held still. It was, looking back, like, I don't even know if I opened them right away. Like, it might have been a week or two until I started looking at them. But just that moment was a fairly significant moment for me. Like, that has shaped a lot of how my life has unfolded since then. And it seems like such a small thing, like a stack of a dozen books could have such a major impact on someone's life, but it did. And so we started from there. I started reading all of the Dungeons & Dragons Advanced Second Edition stuff, and grabbed some friends. I think we were in middle school, and tried to arrange those sleepover weekends where we could play.
That's awesome. Were you like the DM to start with, or were you a player first?
No, I was a player first for sure. We had a DM named Daniel, if I'm remembering correctly. I believe so. And he was always the DM. I think he had played before, or like his older brother, how you are when you're kids. I think he knew a guy who had played already, so he had experience in it somehow. So he was running the games at first, and I was big into like theater and stuff in high school. So I, just jumped right into a player role. And, we had played some of the, early RPG video games that were coming out. And so we'd all had some kind of introduction to what was about to unfold. But, obviously when you get to play on a tabletop, it's it's a human computer. So it's a completely different experience.
It's one of those things where, like, once you get into it, and if you just really embrace it, it just is such an incredible experience. And like, I remember my first times playing and then discovering that, hey, there's actually like more people out there, and they sell these books like not only at a bookstore but like at a gaming store.
Right. That was it never occurred to me. We used those books for years. It never occurred, there are other games. There are shops devoted to it. Like, I remember walking into the first real gaming store I walked into and just shocked at like just GURPS alone, what it covered was shocking. Like, that's a great experience. So it was like you got this little entry point into this world, and then at one point you walk into a shop for your first time and the whole thing just explodes and it just goes everywhere. You can go into any kind of setting or genre you can really imagine. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that was the thing, like, in college, is because I had like the all the D&D books from second edition, give or take, and then like the college game that I joined was still second edition right before Wizards purchased and like switched over to third edition. But I remember going to my new comic shop in the new city I was in to sign up for my comics that I wanted pulled, and they had an entire like wall dedicated just to tabletop role-playing games, and one section of that wall was all like riffs, and then one section was Dungeons and Dragons, and one section was like White Wolf games. And it is just like, looking at that, like, compared to my experiences just at like B. Dalton or Barnes and Noble or Walden Books or whatever it was, and seeing how much more I was missing out on, it is just so like life-changing. And the people that I've played role-playing games with are the people that I've remained friends with, even though, we're scattered across the United States and have moved on and have families and everything else. It's like those people are the people that I am friends with to this day.
Absolutely. Half of that first group I played with, we still play together. From
that
middle school.
Awesome.
Yeah, half of us still play together regularly. Well, I shouldn't say regularly, semi-regularly now.
Well, like, I think once college passes, that's when it's hard to really like have a continuous game, and that's, or at least for me, that's what I found, is as life gets, more bills and family and everything else, is just, I can't make time for those 20-hour, 30-hour a weekend like sessions. It's like, if I could do 3, that would be great.
Yep. But one of the nice things, though, I think a real positive change from that time distance is there's a lot more people who are willing to try it now, which is great.
Yes.
So one of the things we specialize on the show we do on the podcast is we bring in new players, whether they're completely new to tabletop or new to the system we're going to be playing. So we always focus on kind of what the new player is experiencing while they're playing the tabletop game. And since we've been doing the show like a year and a half, and I think I was trying to actually count the other day, and I think I've played with 30 new players in a year and a half. Well, I mean,
Sweet.
that's probably more than I've played with the entirety of my life previous. So it's just, and getting to see a new player engage with the game, Like there's always that moment where it really clicks, and they're leaning forward over the table and they're slamming their hand down and rattling dice and getting just it's so awesome to just watch them morph into a tabletop gamer just right in front of you. It's a fantastic experience. And I think shops are getting more inclusive and more welcoming to everybody. And I think more people are getting to try it. There's, podcasts and YouTube shows. There's more media out there showing it. And board gaming, everything is just having this like renaissance right now. That's probably a bit hyperbolic, but there's new vitality to the hobby right now.
Well, and not only and it's not just, from the mainstays like Dungeons and Dragons or the Star Wars role playing. You have games that are all across the board as far as style and setting and what dice you're using and
dice lists, GM lists, mechanic lists. Kickstarter is unleashed this swell of really creative gameplay. It's just it's a great time to be into the hobby right now. That's for sure. I can pretty safely say whatever style of game you would enjoy, it exists right now somewhere.
Yep, you just have to be on the lookout for it, and then you have to knock some people over the head and be like, I want to play this.
Yes, absolutely. And you might find it in, you might have to get it translated from German or something, but it's out there right now for you, just waiting to be discovered.
What are some of your favorite role-playing games?
Well, obviously, I would have to say the Fantasy Flight Games' new Star Wars role-playing game. I love it. I think especially the dice mechanic used in it are amazing. It has a great balance between narrative and simulation style gameplay, so it can kind of feed both groups, I think, in a way that a lot of games would struggle with if that was their goal. But that's not necessarily the goal. They're going for simulation or going for narrative play. So it helps blend a group style really well. So if you have, one of the things we like to do on the show is have somebody who's really mechanics focused and then somebody who's really narrative. So that balance works really well with that game. So it's great in my opinion. Some of the other ones I really like, I enjoy Dungeon World a lot right now. I still haven't got a chance to play it, but I'm really looking forward to playing the new Paranoia. 5th edition's, it's great. It's a great game. It is really welcoming to new players. It's easy to understand. There's a lot of community support for it, which is just better for every game. So, you'd have to put that one on the list for sure.
Now, I've not yet. I've been out of gaming, so to speak, because I just don't have anyone or any time to really do it. But I have the 5th edition D&D book, and I've started reading through it because I listened to actual play podcasts of it, and I'm like, oh, hey, there's some new mechanics. Let me read up on that. But the Star Wars game interests me because I'm familiar with the West End Games D6 version and the Wizards of the Coast D20 version. But I know with Fantasy Flight, I've heard the dice, it leaves it up for interpretation as far as you succeed, but there's an issue, or you succeed and there's a really bad thing. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure, yeah. So in a general sense, and what I enjoy the most about the dice is the end result on the die is usually a multi-state. So it's not just a failure or critical failure or hit or critical hit, but you can have series of outcomes. So it is either going to be a success or a failure. That success or failure is either going to have none or going to have some threat or some advantage. And then occasionally there's these really big triumphs or really crippling despairs. So at any time when you roll something, you can end up in a super varied outcome. So even though you were successful in talking your way into the building, you got a despair on it, so it was actually the building next door. So you can modify the result in a really unique way that is difficult to do in a D20 system. some of the other really key elements to it is there's a cancellation method. So when you roll the dice, the end results usually are canceling out one another, which is a mirror to the action itself. So if you envision two force users battling with lightsabers, as the successes are being canceled by failures, that is supposed to mimic the dueling nature of the attack. So that's the strikes and the blocks. So the dice themselves help tell the narrative component of the roll in a really successful way. So somebody who's not used to thinking about an action in a narrative light has a direct guide to do so. It's incredibly successful. So you'll have people that will really start to add a lot of detail and really get into explaining the actions they're doing when they're rolling the dice.
Right. It's not like, oh, I hit and I've done, X points of damage. It's like now you have to you've got to really start thinking, well, what can this do as far as like what the dice have said? How can I get this to be the way that it needs to be? Because I think like when I hear about the game, the closest thing that I can come up to as an equivalent is like there's an old White Wolf game called Mage, The Awakening, and you had like your powers that your mage could do, but is very abstract. And the person that always ran it was like, you've got to you have your dots like that tell you how powerful you are, but you have to come up with the way that you are actually using those powers, and you've got to think about that and describe it and use that narrative for it to be effective. Right. And it's like, it's not just rolling dice. And I think like that's the closest thing I can come up with as far as like the Fantasy Flight game is like, you've really got to start thinking about the way the story is going. And then I imagine on the DM or story GM side of things, like you've also got to like work with like how it goes. And
right, there's always like a bidding component to, can I use these 3 advantages on this? And that's usually up to their GM style. There are certainly very simulation heavy rules for how you could do that, or you can approach it narratively. But you use the dice as the guide. That's why it's so successful. And it really engages everyone at the table in the roll. So when you are rolling for something, it is something that is occurring in a scene. So people feel part of the action when they can contribute suggestions to spend advantages or triumphs and that sort of thing. So it really gets the whole table invested in everyone's action. So you never have that moment where you're like waiting for your turn, really. You're kind of involved at all times.
Well, that's wonderful, because I know there are times when you play and it's like, okay, is it my turn yet? Is it my turn yet? Oh, I can go to the bathroom. Okay.
Right. Yeah. And, I am guilty of split party on occasion, so that's not gospel, but for the most part, it keeps everyone engaged.
Do you find with the dice, is it for new players coming in, is it harder for them to get that to get that understanding, or do you find it easier for them to get the understanding of what is going on with it?
Somebody with no experience has a slightly easier time than somebody that has a lot of D20 experience, I found. But I've got a sample group, but it's fairly small, so I don't know if that's technically true. But it's fairly close. It's more about, once it clicks that it's more than just pass-fail, they usually pick it up really quick. And there's actually, I have a little helpful guide, and you can print one out, and it's right there for what cancels what. And after 3 or 4 rolls, they usually have it.
Okay.
And before we play a game with a new player, we'll actually do that, where we'll walk through a couple die rolls just so they get a chance to interpret it without any like pressure of actually being in game.
Right. Yeah, that's always helpful. Yep. How is Fantasy Flight as far as being like the Star Wars holder now? Because I know in the Wizards of the Coast days, Star Wars was kind of like, an afterthought next to Dungeons and Dragons, and it wasn't supported and it wasn't really cared for the way it should have been. And I was shocked that Star Wars went from being Wizards of the Coast to someone else. But how is Fantasy Flight as far as like Star Wars role playing game?
I think they're doing a great job with it. I'm a fan of pretty much everything they've done with Star Wars so far. I think I've played almost everything from the Destiny card game, X-Wing, like almost every IP that they've kind of attached a game to. And I've enjoyed practically every one immensely. And even the ones I didn't really super enjoy were still fun and good games. And certainly none of it's ever felt not Star Wars. So I think it's in good hands with them. I've been very happy with everything they've done.
Awesome. Now, besides tabletop gaming, which I know we'll circle back to, with talking about the podcast. Sure. So you told me before we started that you're into, and it's a genre of music that I'm not too familiar with, I guess,
right.
But it's out there and people go to conventions and there's like nerdcore music.
Yeah, and they might not even call it that anymore. It's been a while since I've played in the band. But yeah, so when you go to conventions, like we've gone to PAX and stuff like that, there's usually some kind of music act, and they're usually a lot of fun. So nerdcore is kind of like a broad genre. I think that's probably most often applied to the hip hop artist in that area. But yeah, I played in a nerdcore rock band called the Neskimos for a while. I was one of the founding members for that. So we got to go and play shows at PAX and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun. We did like video game music, Nintendo music. But a lot of it is kind of just nerd culture. It'll be comic book based music, fan based music. So you have like bands dedicated to Doctor Who, the Chameleon Circuit. They're great. So there's kind of this broad genre of geek nerd fandom specifically influenced music. So there was a convention in Orlando they used to do. I don't know if they're still putting it on.
How did you get into nerdcore music? I mean, were you like a musician before?
No, actually,
you got into that band.
That one of my good friends and one of the gentlemen who founded the band and basically kind of the brains of the whole thing, because he's the like prodigy genius musician. It was one summer and we were kids and bored, and teach me to play music. So when you are learning to play music, it is easier to learn songs you already know. So he picked Nintendo songs because, as little kids, we played those over and over again, and they're fairly simple and kind of easy to remember, at least the basic melodies of them. So he just kind of taught me to play bass with Nintendo songs, and somebody, overheard it and, just, hey, you should put drums behind it. And then we did this little band and we were going to play a show one summer, and that was going to be it. And it actually ended up doing very well. So we played for quite a while. And then as, college had set in and passed, we Dread Pirate Roberts, the band, as we call it. So, other people would come in and start filling in slots. So I think there's actually been 8 members at this point.
Okay. Any favorite like franchises that you guys covered?
Oh, yes.
Or any like particular songs or genres?
So we all had pseudonyms. So I was actually Simon Belmont, and we did Vampire Killer. So that song I absolutely love. It's a great song in general, and it is an amazing rock song. And I'm sure you could find it on YouTube or wherever. But yeah, we did Zelda. That one was very, very popular. We got to do this little segment on MTV where they did a show on video games. And so they played that one. That was great. Mario, of course, we'd found like Mario is kind of like a, I don't know, I have to think of a nicer way to say that. Everybody at a show in a bar knows that song. So even somebody who is inebriated to the point of like almost unconscious will like get up and get excited about that song. So that was always a big fun one too.
How long did you do it for? And I mean, you said you're on MTV and you did like conventions.
Oh yeah,
and stuff.
yeah. I was in the band for several years. I want to say 4 or 5, something like that. Yeah, and we got to go and do conventions like MagFest. We did one of the early PAXs, so that was before they had split up. That was a ton of fun. So it was doing conventions like that was very weird because, you know, we were all basically from a small town and nobody knew who we were, but at conventions a lot of people knew who you were, and it was a very surreal experience to be like a minor celebrity but only like 6 weekends a year.
That's cool. Like, and you know, I always like whenever I see the PAX promotions or Dragon Con or whatnot, and you see like the bands that are coming, like the nerd oriented music, it's like that's kind of cool. Like, I wish like I could play music, and I know that one of my sons, like they're all learning to play piano, and one of the songs that he's working on is like the Pokemon theme song.
Yep. See, that's good. He'll learn that one for sure.
Oh yeah, like his teacher rewards him whenever he does well. He gets like another like line of music or row of music to practice with.
Oh, that's clever.
Eventually, he'll have the complete song.
Nice, gamified. That's very clever. Good on that instructor.
Do you still listen to nerdcore music or nerd music, or is that something that now that you're out of it? Like,
oh no, so
not
yeah,
so
I still
much
have my favorites. So yeah, like I really like MC Front a lot. We got to hang out with him a couple times at conventions. He is a super nice guy. He's one of my favorite on the hip hop side.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I think you told me before we started recording that if people look up on YouTube, they might be able to find some of your
oh yeah
some videos
if you
of
do
you guys playing.
If you do a search for Neskimos, there's definitely stuff up, unless the internet has scrubbed it for some reason. But no, it should still be there. It's a lot of fun. It's and there's quite a few bands that do it. I think the last one I saw, they actually did it with like a full orchestra, so like a video game live orchestra, which was it was amazing. So yeah, it was like a 40-piece orchestra doing Zelda. It was incredible.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that we live in a time that like there's like I know here in Orlando they had like the Legends of Zelda Symphonic Orchestra come through, and like the Pokemon, and you're seeing like even you're watching like Harry Potter movies and they have the full orchestra to play along in those pieces. Yeah. It's crazy to think that way back from like the Nintendo days to now, like you are getting these, you're getting people just paying money to listen to that music.
Yeah, I know, right? Probably a lot more than they ever paid for the game too, especially if it's the orchestral stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I wanted to take the kids to the Pokemon one, but it was out of my price range.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed, music in general. So getting to learn to play it was awesome, and especially getting to play video game music. I mean, people who enjoy that kind of music are great. They're super fans. I don't know if you've been to a show, but usually they have whatever the handheld console is. That's what they like hold up instead of lighters when they want you to play more. It's fantastic.
Oh, I've only seen the stuff through like YouTube videos but I've never seen that, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
like if people just hold up like their Nintendo DSs.
Yep, that's pretty much what they do. It is fantastic.
Very cool. And let's see here. So we talked about some tabletop gaming. We talked about nerdcore music, and obviously there's like the big one that's in the room before we get to your podcast, and that is Star Wars.
Yes.
And one of the things that you wrote down, because I send out the little questionnaire to get information from people, and you and I are very similar because you wrote down that you got into Star Wars by watching bootlegged VHSs that your parents had of the original trilogy, and I had the same thing. My parents used to go to this videotape, like not a rental store,
right?
but they would pick up VHS tapes that people had recorded like a bunch of different movies on. And to everybody that's listening, like that doesn't know what a VHS tape is, it's like this big black brick,
Right.
and you could fit like 2 to 3 movies on them, depending on like the quality of the videotape.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
There's always like
I
the
remember like
HBO logo all like cocked and out of frame and scratchy. Yeah.
yeah, and you know, I remember like, and you'd have the handwritten labels like what's on there, and it's like, oh, I don't know what that is, but I'll watch it. And like, I remember like my parents had like Casablanca and like the Maltese Falcon and all these like really old ones, but Star Wars was among like the ones that they had taped in there. And that's like, that was my first introduction as well, was seeing that like just on that, like, and I had no concept of what Star Wars was beforehand.
Right, and it's so funny that you mentioned those white handwritten labels, because they were labeled A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. So they didn't say Star Wars on them. So that actually took me a little while to put 2 and 2 together.
It's like, what is this? Oh, what do you mean there's another
Yeah,
movie?
so
Like,
can I watch the Hope
was
movie
my
again?
thing.
Can I watch the Hope movie? Yeah, that.
Right, like that was my thing. Is I remember watching Star Wars and being like, okay, all done. And then like there was a point in time where I wasn't, like, as a kid I wasn't into like, I was more into the cartoons and Disney, obviously. You know, as a kid you just gravitate towards that stuff. And then I remember that like my friends had these Star Wars toys, probably like mid 80s, and I was like, what's that thing from? Like, it's just some random weird looking creature. He's like, oh, that's from like Empire Strikes Back. I'm like, what's the Empire Strikes Back?
Nice. And actually, funny you mentioned, but the same cousin that gave me my first Dungeons and Dragons books had those toys too. So I got to see it in the Millennium Falcon playset. He had the whole thing.
Oh man, I remember playing with my friend's Millennium Falcon thing and just like dropping it. You're playing with it and you're crashing it, and you just crash it into the carpet, and then I think about like, how much were those toys
Right.
worth back in the day that I was playing with?
I don't know if I was allowed to touch that. I might have been.
What is it about Star Wars that has made you a fan of Star Wars? Like, what grabs you?
It's the storytelling for me. It's very structured. It's very structured in a way that makes it feels very comfortable to me. I like so many things about fantasy, and I like so many things about sci-fi, and it's this wonderful blend of the two. And the way the stories were told, especially in those original movies, the focus on those 3 central characters as they moved through the story. I mean, it's some of the best. Like, I mean, they literally use it as an example when explaining the hero's journey. Like, it's textbook storytelling. It's so good in that way, and that was kind of my gateway to storytelling as a creative vehicle, and not just being inspired by the films themselves, but learning about the structure, learning the 3-act structure, learning the hero's journey, figuring out how to apply that to other stories. So that was kind of the key for me to understanding a lot about storytelling.
Favorite movie?
Oh, out of all of them?
Yeah.
That's tough. I mean, I think I have to go Empire, but the giant asterisk on that is, and I hope I don't catch any flack for this, more so than just the movie, but what The Force Awakens has done for Star Wars, I think might nudge it up for me, higher than necessarily the quality of the film itself. But again, it's about the structure of that storytelling. So what they were mimicking from the original stories, I got the same feel for, like that felt that familiar place for me as that entry point to storytelling. So I think that had a unique effect on me, probably more so than anybody else. I understand the complaint that it feels similar to the first film, but I feel that was very intentional and an excellent choice. So it probably kind of just pops up a little higher for me. And just seeing it at Celebration, I mean, seeing that many young fans that were in it. I mean, I don't think I saw a girl under 12 that wasn't dressed as Rey. Like, I mean, that's really cool. So there's this, I guess, just getting to that age where the baton is starting to be passed to the next generation of the people that's going to embrace the fandom. It's really cool for that too. But I think in just terms of movie, I have to go Empire. But in terms of general impact on Star Wars, I would go Force Awakens.
Okay. I know, like, for me, it's always Empire, but I was a bit underwhelmed with Force Awakens just because it's hard to pinpoint beyond, like, there's a lot of cribbing from A New Hope, but I really like the characters. Like, I really love Finn and Rey, and I want to know more about, like, Phasma and Kylo Ren and get, like, the background, which, is, again, as a Star Wars fan growing up in the 80s, we had all of the movies to go off of. It was like, it's not like Force Awakens where you have Force Awakens and now we have to wait for the next two.
I see your point.
And then you can like you can judge it then, like, as the new trilogy, that, see what they're trying to do and where it's going. And so, like, and that's what I've said in a few different, like, recordings with people, is like, I have to really reserve judgment on Force Awakens until I get the next two. But I know for me, when I saw Rogue One, like, that took me back all the way to watching, like, A New Hope or Star Wars or whatever you want to say, like, on videotape, like, because it had that same grittiness, it had that same feel, and, like, that movie was, like, for me, like the first hour or so, all obviously story building and setting, characters and getting the backgrounds and everything. But the last half of the movie was just incredible, and everything that I'd want in a Star Wars movie.
And that's a really interesting point, that we got to experience that original trilogy as a whole. So, Rogue One was a complete story. So I think that's a really interesting, very valid point about the fact that it's a trilogy and we haven't seen the whole thing yet too. That's very interesting. But I totally agree about Rogue One too. I mean, that's up there. It's within the top 3 or 4 for me for sure. And I'm a big sucker for droids, so K2SO is phenomenal.
Yes. Do you have a favorite character or a favorite, like, top 3 characters? Because there's obviously a lot of characters in the Star Wars universe.
Right. Oh, that's a really good question. I think it's something I would have thought of too. Oh my gosh. 3 is even challenging. Like, I mean, because that's, I would have to pick one, like, non-droid at least. So, I mean, C-3PO for sure, especially as a child. And I actually got to meet Anthony Daniels, and he was super nice to me. So, yeah, C-3PO for sure. I mean, I probably spent at least a year straight of my childhood being Luke because, I had the ability to. Basically, I saw that character in myself. So I think I would have to do Luke, and then probably Rey. I really like Rey, and I know there's some argument out there, but I really like that character. That's a lot of what I like in Luke, plus a little more grit, I think. Not so whiny, a little more wherewithal, I think. And that's a product of the environments they grew up in. That says nothing directly about the, characters themselves.
Right. I know I was asked the question about, like, who my favorite character was in a different podcast episode. for a podcast called Zing This. They're doing like every month they review one of the Star Wars movies in order.
Oh, cool.
And they talk about it. And my favorite character like is in the movies, but really like blossomed in like the books and the comics afterwards, and it was like Wedge Antilles.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone is like, oh, who's Wedge Antilles? And it's like, Wedge Antilles is the guy that's been involved in like both Death Star attacks and
Yep.
like, I like I one of the things I love about Star Wars is you get all these like background characters, and you can find of course now there is like Legends universe and stuff, but you can find like stories about like almost every character that shows up. There's some kind of story about them.
Absolutely. And if there isn't, you just bring it to the game table and build it yourself.
Absolutely, because obviously you and I both tabletop gamers, and I've played like the Star Wars D20 and the D6, and you play the Fantasy Flight version, but some of the most incredible role-playing, storytelling stuff that has happened has been in the Star Wars game, because it's such a broad universe and broad, you can play all sorts of stories in that Star Wars universe, and you're not defined to, major epic space operas. You can get down to like nitty-gritty commando type stuff, or like run a smuggler type game, and it lends itself so well for almost anything.
Absolutely. And I mean, the role-playing games, especially the earlier editions, I mean, they contributed so much to that early expanded universe. I mean, that really came from the tabletop game.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the alien names came from the original like West End games, stuff where they actually named, instead of like, oh look, it's a hammerhead, oh well, let's give him like an alien name and talk about where he's from.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly the ties and the licensing and all that, but there was a serious connection between the role-playing game itself and the expanded universe for sure.
Now, are you looking forward to this next movie coming out, the Last Jedi?
Absolutely. I am doing pretty good at not learning too much about it. So I'm trying to remain pretty spoiler free. I'm probably gonna have to put that add-on up onto my browser again pretty soon here.
Yeah, I did that with Force Awakens, where like I refused to watch the trailer. I didn't do anything until I didn't read any reviews. I just went to it just straight up watching it. And I've seen the trailer for Last Jedi because I was in Star Wars Celebration when they launched it. It's almost unavoidable.
Right. Yep. Yeah, you could not, because you were there. And you were going to hear,
yeah.
I mean, there was no way you were going to avoid it, so you might as well watch it.
Exactly. But everything else, like, I'm going to try as best as I can to stay away from, like, any new trailers and new spoil, like, because I like going in for certain movies, just show me what you have. I don't want to like get spoiled by seeing like scenes that are cut or not cut, or oh, those scenes look cool but they didn't make the movie. And
right. Yeah, there are certain films where I feel it will lower my enjoyment the more I learn about it. I want to go in as fresh as possible. And to be fair, if it follows a similar formula, we're already going to be like halfway familiar with the content. So I want to just avoid as much as possible.
We've talked about Star Wars and role-playing games, and I mentioned it briefly in the beginning, and we've talked about it some, is that you have a podcast called Dice for Brains.
Yes.
And Dice for Brains is a actual play Star Wars podcast?
Yes. Yeah, that's accurate.
Hooray! I've done something correct. For those who don't know about it, if you could just give us a rundown of what Dice for Brains is.
Sure. So we are a Star Wars actual play. We focus on the character and the story development as our primary goal, as well as bringing new players to the table. So as I'd mentioned earlier, we our first 3 seasons, we had a brand new player to tabletop gaming. Then we spent some time introducing players who had never played the Star Wars game, but we're familiar with Pathfinder and D&D. And then for the new season that's going to start in, depending on when this comes out, it's probably right about starting. We brought another new player to the table as well. So what we do is we're playing out seasons that are structured closely to like a television show. So they're about 45 minutes long, and we follow one season arc for about 12 episodes. And then, of course, because it's Star Wars, we then tell those seasons in trilogies. So our second season 6 is about to start, which is the last season of our second trilogy in the story. And, you know, as a fan of the films and really starting my connection with the Star Wars universe there, one of the things we wanted to do was have a similar, as close and unmistakable Star Wars feel, if that makes sense. So we really wanted it to feel like the films and feel like the television shows and it feel very Star Wars. So we focus on the Force and Destiny part of the game. So it was one, there's quite a few Star Wars actual plays, and this was one area that nobody was really covering. So we wanted to focus on, you know, the Force users and the Jedi and the Sith. That was always kind of my favorite part of Star Wars. So we really focus on Force users, specifically after the fall of the Empire. So after the destruction of the second Death Star.
Okay. Do you do it over like Skype or like on, you know, on various websites that you can record, or is it everybody's at a table?
So for the main seasons, when I play with the cast, everyone's at the table. So everyone comes to the studio and we play, we play for about 4 hours, and we'll get, 2 or 3 episodes out of that session usually. But I do play a pregame with our listeners. So before every season, I'll, do a little contest, sign up here, send me an email, that kind of thing. And I'll grab 4 or 5 listeners and we'll play what amounts to kind of a session 0. So they will play some of the NPCs in the story that we're about to tell that season. And they help me randomize a lot of the story elements. So they contribute a lot of really good ideas and help me do a lot of the world building. And we do that over Roll20. So I've played quite a few Star Wars games over Roll20 as well. It's great for that.
Oh, that's awesome. Especially getting like the people that are listening and following you guys to be able to have that opportunity to jump in.
Yeah,
and,
we're about to do
influence the story.
Sorry, go ahead. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's fine. I was just saying, like, it's cool that you get to have them like jump in and help out and influence the story and like set up like things that could happen in the future.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm about to do the one for season 6 right now, so we're actually about to play it. They've already contributed so much to it, but yeah, they add, they're players. They come, they bring unique experiences, they have unique spins on the story and on Star Wars. One of the benefits of the Star Wars game itself and why it's so good at bringing new players to tabletop role-playing games is there's really isn't anybody that doesn't have some level of familiarity with Star Wars already. Mm-hmm. So anyone who likes Star Wars will be able to play this game with very minimally, like reading or learning about a system or a world. They don't need to learn anything more than what they already know about Star Wars to be able to enjoy this game. So that has been like the linchpin in being able to get so many new players to try tabletop gaming.
Yeah, that's the one thing I found when I was running Star Wars D20 back in college, is that even people like, Dungeons and Dragons, it just depends. Usually you play homebrew or you're playing like a module or a certain setting, and like vampire or werewolf, it's dependent on what the person that's running the game is doing. But Star Wars is Star Wars. Like you know what Star Wars is, and even if you don't know the name of the alien, like you recognize the alien, and you're like, oh, I want to play that kind of alien.
Yep, it's almost better when you describe it anyways. But yeah, you get that instant just buy-in from every player. It's fantastic. A lot of people come to the hobby through D&D, and that's great, but if you know somebody that likes Star Wars and doesn't particularly enjoy the idea of playing Dungeons and Dragons, you can probably get them to play this.
Absolutely. And it's just, an hour or 2 of somebody's time and you get them hooked and that's it.
Yeah, the beginner boxes are great for the system, actually. So I think they're like $20. So you grab, 5 people, split a box, and that's great.
What's the hardest thing of running an actual play Star Wars podcast?
Ooh, scheduling probably. At the table, one of the most challenging things is the timing, which I know is probably related to scheduling, but the pacing is really what I mean. So because of the structured target I have of being able to present it in kind of a season structure that fits into a trilogy, keeping the storyline moving in a way that feels very Star Wars is a little tough. So it's taken some, adaptation to the way I run a game. The advantage is because we're doing it for the show, it's the people who are playing are really, really protective of the story, and they're really engaged in the story. So I kind of have like the best players playing for the story at all times. So that's very advantageous when I'm trying to do this. But it's certainly challenging. And specifically with this game, there's a level of freedom that the players have. So like every player by default is practically like 10% GM just by mechanics. So there was that when I first started playing, there was kind of that unwillingness to relinquish some of the control over the story and really let the flow take over. But this game will quickly get you out of that habit. So the way everyone contributes to the story gets them to really connect with the other players and with me, the game master, in a way that I have not really seen in another game, to be honest. And I don't know if that's the actual play or if that's the game itself.
Okay. Yeah, I know, there's a ton of actual plays out there. I know for my podcast, like I've spoken with the host or the DM from like You Meet in a Tavern, and I've had the entire Dungeons and Dragons crew on to talk to them about like their actual play.
Nice.
And I've had James D'Amato on from One Shot.
Yeah, he's great.
Just to talk, and it's very interesting to hear about like how each person sets up their game as far as pacing goes, because that's always the thing. Because like, how do you want to end your episode? Like, are you going to end like before a combat, or are you going to end like after a combat, or like on a cliffhanger or a discovery, or the natural feel of it? And it's very like, it varies a lot with just dependent on the system and the story and the characters and everything. It's such an interesting thing, like to hear about from people that just run their actual plays, to find out about how it's done, especially with pacing, as far as like getting an episode out there.
So one of the things that I think we do a little differently than a lot of shows is it's not like one big campaign. So because I'm aiming for 12 episodes, and I am and because I am really glued and really connected to the 3-act structure, I use that as kind of my guide points. And specifically, like you were mentioning, where we end, I really use the 3-act structure to tell me that. So it'll be, cliffhangers until the big reveal that's going to change the player's, quote unquote world forever, and then it'll lead into a cliffhanger, and then we'll have a somber moment. So there's literally like a formula I could probably write you if I ever like sat down to try. And I'd be willing to bet I'm probably within 80% of that on these episodes, which is one of the strengths of Star Wars. So I set up Star Wars games probably a little differently than I set up a normal campaign. And for me, I'm pretty much almost entirely an improvisational GM. So I do very little like note taking, that kind of stuff. Now that doesn't mean I don't like plan ahead. I plan ahead quite a bit, but it's more based around intentions and ways I want or hope the story will move. So I don't really ever nail down actual scenes ahead of time. I will build characters. I'll probably build like the one big, antagonist character, but more often it's just characteristics that I assemble into a character when that character is needed. And I do the same thing with sets and scenes. So I'll have a planet, and that'll be my base point, and I'll have, the idea for a room, but that room's not really locked to any one position. So I can usually react. So it's really, I'm more reacting to what the players are contributing than planning ahead and trying to get the players to react to my story.
For people that, this is the first time that they're hearing about this, and if they want to listen, would you advise them going back to episode 1, season 1 and going through, or is it where you can just jump in at like season 6?
This is actually hotly contested between our listeners, which is funny to me. So the way I would probably recommend it is start with one of the 2 trilogy arcs, so either season 1 or season 4. Or if you just wanted to get a taste for the show, we've got some special episode collections, some like 3-part one-shots, Holocrons of Bava we've done, the Hintaro Hustle we just finished. That was a crossover with the Redemption podcast. Other than that, if you want to just jump into a season, I would probably pick 1 or 4. I think you will have a slightly different experience based on which one you do, which isn't like a positive or negative. I think you end up with slightly different opinions of certain characters depending on what order you listen to it in.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's always interesting, especially with actual plays. Luckily, like you do yours in seasons. There are so many of them where it's just a long stream of it, and like I was lucky enough to jump in on some of them like right as they had started. I'm like, okay, cool, I can keep up. But there are others that are so highly recommended, but they've got 100 episodes, 200 episodes, and hours of content on, each episode is an hour, 2 hours long, and I'm not going to catch up, and I'm just going to have to just listen to people tell me about them instead of actually getting to hear about them.
Yeah, I actually encountered a similar problem, which is why I decided to structure the show the way I did. It's literally that season. You can go in at a season. It's not 2 hours. It's 45. It's what you'd expect to commit time-wise if you're going to watch a television show. So you could figure out whether you like it or not pretty quickly and jump in really at the start of any season. So you can really do it however you'd like, and you won't miss anything. There won't be, I've done a fairly decent job of keeping the seasons representative and holistic of themselves. And it was literally just to solve that problem, because I encountered that issue too, where I can't sit through 100 episodes of 3 hours of unedited audio. I just can't do it as much as it would entertain me. I can't. I don't have that kind of time. I know people who listen to those on they'll listen at 1.5 speed, and they love it. I couldn't do it. I tried. I just couldn't get into it.
Yeah, I've tried the 1.5 speed on some podcasts. It's like I feel like I'm losing it, like losing what it should be sounding like. Just to finish like an extra few minutes early, I'll just listen to it normally.
Right, and we use a lot of music and ambient audio and sound effects and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot going on within that small 45-minute chunk. So we do a fair bit of editing to really keep the story flowing, which I think was kind of a conscious decision, just because of some of those issues that I encountered where the game would be constantly broken up in a way that made the story difficult for me to follow.
For people that are listening and they've listened to this podcast episode and they're interested in finding out more about the podcast or about you, where can they find it? What are the best places for like social media for them to follow you?
So diceforbrains.com will have all the Dice for Brains information. We'll publish our episodes there, where you can get shirts, all that kind of stuff. On Twitter, it's at Dice for Brains. Facebook is Dice for Brains. Instagram is Dice for Brains. I'm pretty sure we got them all at Dice for Brains, I think. So with whatever included character needs to be there for that social media component, plus Dice for Brains is probably where you'll find us.
Hooray for getting everything to fit and not having to shorten anything.
I think we did it. If I remember correctly, we did. There might be some with no spaces, but I think we did it.
Yeah, that was the one thing when I started this one. It's like, okay, Tales from the Fandom is too big for Twitter. I must shorten it. But awesome. Well, Ross, I'm so appreciative, number one, of your time and taking your time out of your schedule to come on and record an episode of this podcast and just getting more people interested in what you do and who you are, and I highly recommend checking out Dice for Brains because it's a wonderful podcast.
Thank you.
And I love the characters and the story, and it's just so well done. And I think, and you said it earlier, like your podcast is something that stands alone from a lot of like what other actual plays that are out there. And if you really love Star Wars and Star Wars stories, definitely give Dice for Brains a chance. And take a listen, invest a few hours in it, and it'll probably be something that you'll really enjoy.
Oh, thank you so much. This was an absolute delight to get to catch up with you again. Hopefully we'll run into each other at MegaCon. What do we have coming up next? We've got some cons. We'll talk about that later. But we'll see each other soon, I'm sure.
It would be my pleasure, Ross.
Excellent.
And thank you so much for even us talking at Celebration.
Absolutely.
And on email and everything else.
Yeah, we'll have to get you to the table. You got to try out Fantasy Flight's game. You haven't played this one yet, right?
Right, I have.
Okay,
not.
yeah, we got to get you at the table then. That's gonna happen. We'll pick a con. It's happening.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Tales from the Fandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.